Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. So earlier today, I discussed my general thoughts about the tariffs and Trump's varied and often contradictory justifications for them. Now, part two, I'd like to home in on the UK specifically. So far, the results show that the government has gotten their approach of diplomacy first rather than retaliation right. Of course, it could still all go wrong. So what's the impact on the UK? What are the ways in which the situation could get better or could get worse? But first, for daily news and politics, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So first of all, the cheesy what's-it of rage has applied a 10% baseline rate to almost every country. So the UK is getting the 10% rate. That means he's dealt with us as generously, if we can use that word, as he was prepared to with anyone. And when the media were losing their minds over the prospect of these tariffs, they were tending to use the models which included the 25% rates. So whatever tales of woe were being reported on a few days ago, the result is way better than that. However, it is worth noting a couple of things. First, 10% is still bad. It will still reduce exports and therefore make some jobs vulnerable. Second, Trump had already applied 25% tariffs to steel, aluminium and cars. Those haven't gone away. This 10% baseline is on top of all that. So the UK car industry is not enjoying Trump's second term in office. And when it comes to cars, there isn't really another market to turn to. I noted a while ago that Scottish whisky producers were actively trying to push more into the Asian market to try and compensate, because we've known that this day has been coming for a while. And that can happen, especially if China levies extra tariffs on, say, US spirits, which I would have thought it's likely to. The car industry doesn't really have this option, but the news could have been a lot worse for the UK in general and is vindication for the approach Starmer has taken so far. Our approach has been to work on a trade deal which will benefit Trump as well as ourselves and use that as a way of hopefully dodging the tariffs altogether, or at least having them set as low as possible. Now, trade expert David Hennig has said that the approach is very risky, that by pushing for this trade deal, Trump's people are now scrutinising the trade landscape of the UK and homing in on areas of friction, such as online safety laws, that would not have happened if we'd kept our heads down. And there have certainly been reports that we have had to rebuff the Americans on online safety laws, food standards and equality laws. Trump's government wants all three of these trashing. People are worried that we are going to back down on something under the pressure. So yes, risky. I can see how very risky, but there is also a huge potential payout. Consider this possible chain of events. So Trump has said that other countries have been mean and that if they lower their trade barriers to the US, he will lower America's to them again. He's made no claim that it's set in stone what he announced yesterday. So the UK agrees a trade deal with the US, which of course has the effect of opening up our market to some, US companies, which both sides want. Trump has applied the tariffs to the UK and the UK has agreed to his terms. So Trump gets to sell it as a major vindication of his strategy back home. Britain is the first to agree to lower these mythical trade barriers to the US, and Trump drops those tariffs against us. I don't think he'll drop all of them, but he may get rid of that blanket baseline. It all gets announced in Scotland, where he has his slap-up meal with the King. The UK get to dodge most of the tariffs altogether. We get the tech-based trade agreement that sort of Labour seem to want anyway, hopefully without backsliding on standards. And Trump gets to say that this is how you do deals with him. Now other countries just need to do the same and we can all get back to a useful trading arrangement, right? Americans willing to go along with this nonsense will believe the narrative and give the policy more time to work after the early win. And it's something which could actually happen pretty quickly. I gather the bare bones of the deal have already been agreed. So if Trump would like to decide to stop pushing for mad shit like the abolition of basic rights, we could be announcing it really very soon. It's not a comprehensive trade deal. This is not the full-blooded comprehensive free trade agreement that Boris Johnson wanted. As I understand it, it's quite limited. Now, this is the outcome which our government wants. It's not necessarily what will happen. Trump is fickle. His people know nothing of trade. It could all still go wrong. But if it does go wrong, will the result really be worse than if we told him to piss off from the start? I'm not sure about that. So the risk for me is only that we end up where we would have been if we'd adopted Ed Davies' idea. And the potential benefit is we dodge almost all of the tariffs entirely. However, if it all does go wrong, as well it might, what should we do then? Well, Davy's plan is still a nonsense. We may need to retaliate or not. I really don't know what's the best thing to do if it all goes tits up. I'm minded to think not retaliating is best, not because I'm a trade expert, largely because almost every country in the world is not actually retaliating with their own tariffs. They're making it clear that would be self-defeating. Hardly anyone in the world is capable of retaliating. So just making a show of it just hurts you. You just punch yourself in the face. But Davy was arguing we should form a sort of what he called a coalition of the willing, to echo Starmer's words on defence, with Canada and the EU on retaliatory tariffs. Sorry, but this is a batshit idea designed to let Ed Davies going, look, I need to, I'm going to be the opposition, right? I need to have a different stance to Labour. That's what it sounds like to me. You can form a united defence force. You cannot form a united trade force informally. Canada, the UK and the EU are three different markets, and Trump can treat them all differently. Indeed, he has. There were no additional tariffs announced on Canada yesterday because they'd already hit them. There's 10% baseline for the UK and 20% baseline for the EU. So let's say we coordinated our response, which would be very difficult because we'd all have to agree what tariffs we're going to apply, right? And some of the tariffs are... See, the ideal retaliatory tariff is one that hurts the aggressor but doesn't stoke inflation in your own country, in your own market, which is very difficult to do. And which products you apply them to will meet those criteria differently in Canada, the UK and the EU, right? So it'd be very difficult to even agree a common response. But let's say you did, right? The results would still sting from some more than others. So Trump, for example, could go, oh, this Canadian action's hurting a bit. Oh, right, I'm feeling that. Right, I don't like this. And he could come to a deal with Canada, but persist with the UK and the EU. And Canada won't refuse the deal out of solidarity. That would be to suffer inflation unnecessarily. Canadians support being tough with Trump, but not stupid. No, we're on our own. We're our own market. That's what Brexit means. We're our own market. If we end up having to retaliate, if the plan ends up going to shit and we decide retaliation has to be part of the solution, we need to select the US imports, which will not stoke inflation for ordinary people in this country, but still hurt Trump or his main supporters. And we will have to do it on our own because Trump will treat us in isolation anyway. But as for whether we should retaliate, I mean, obviously not right now because the diplomacy plan is working. But if the trade deal collapses and he hits us with EU level tariffs, or even just keeps the current ones, then a tricky decision. As I've discussed recently, there are huge risks either way. If we retaliate, we risk escalation, which could cost more jobs and hit the budget harder. We definitely stoke inflation for our own people, making the cost of living worse when the cost of living is costing governments in elections. We risk the retaliation not even hurting Trump enough, so we're stuck with it for the long term, maybe for years. This is ultimately why lots of countries are not retaliating. Other countries in our position are not bothering because they say wouldn't work to get Trump to back down, so that all they will do is raise inflation in their own country. The only markets retaliating so far anyway are, or say they will, China, the EU and Canada. Even Mexico is being cautious and saying, no, we're not messing about with this. It may well be that we simply don't have the firepower to get Trump to back down with retaliation, because that would be important. Do we have something that could really sting him? If the answer is no, waste of time. However, there is a risk of not retaliating. And that is that there's nothing to dissuade Trump from raising tariffs further if he thinks that he can carry on coming back and we'll just take it, right? So quite frankly, it is just better all round if the trade discussion strategy works out. That we can agree something which Trump approves of without having to give away too much. We'll inevitably have to give something. That we protect as many jobs as possible. Because remember that a trade war means lost jobs. I think too many people are thinking of this like a political game of ideology. It's not a game of risk with plastic pieces. People's jobs are on the line. Protecting them needs to be a priority. It's not just about the tax revenues. I think, again, people think about the tax revenues. Oh, but we could just raise them this other way. It's like, yeah, but it's people's livelihoods as well. Finally, worth talking about the customs union again. Now, if things did go tits up, I think we should be really looking at this seriously for next year. You might imagine, in fact, indeed, some people are imagining, that this lower tariff rate than the EU means an argument against joining the customs union. However, if you have a little look at the full list of tariffs, you have a little look at Turkey. Now, Turkey is in a customs union with the EU, but they have had the 10% tariff rate applied. So being in a customs union with the EU apparently does not necessarily mean being treated in the same class as the EU. Also, even if it did, wouldn't matter. Even a customs union with the EU could be more valuable than a light touch from a fickle mob boss in America. And however the trade strategy with the US works out, even if it works well, it still means problems compared to before Trump. The heavy tariffs on the EU and counter tariffs, for example, are going to mean EU customers have less to spend on our stuff as well. So there will always be an argument to reduce trade barriers with the EU as much as possible. Remember, and I said this in a recent video, people seem to be ignoring it, we have lost more trade with the EU since Brexit than we export in goods in total to America. So if Trump arranged tariffs for us so excessive that we literally couldn't export a single physical product to America, we'd still be better off inside the EU. You know, our strategy with the US is damage limitation. There is no scope for growth with the US. It's damage limitation. But since Brexit, we do have the potential for genuine boost to trade with Europe. But some people are still behaving as if there's a choice to be made between the EU and the USA. There isn't. Some things a government says are rhetoric. They're not strictly or sometimes even remotely true. But when the government says it's not a choice between America and Europe, they are right on this occasion. Nothing we are agreeing with the US is a barrier to us working on closer relations with the EU. And nothing we are talking to the EU about is a problem for our trade negotiations with the US. The idea that we can simply do without American trade is the same level of Brexit exceptionalism thinking that got us into one mess. We don't really need it getting into another. Finally, just as a general point, I see lots of comments on these videos and this channel, but as well as social media in general, of people thinking they see the cynical ploy that Trump is pushing. Oh, he's doing it for this. Oh, it's for this. It's for that. And I get it, because like with Brexit, for example, we knew that there were some very wealthy people making a lot of money shorting the pound, for example, when they knew certain things were going to be announced that would massively reduce the value of the pound by up there, and then it'll raise up, blah, blah, blah. So they're assuming Trump is doing something similar, right? There's some cunning plan, because there's always someone gains. When you wreck an economy, someone always gains, right? Disaster capitalism. And people think that Trump is pushing some cynical ploy. I don't think he is. I just think Trump's an idiot. I know there may be some calculating evil behind his throne, but ultimately these decisions are Trump's. The man's an imbecile. There is no ploy. There's no nefarious scheme, just an idiot with a Sharpie. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.